Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deidre Gifford, currently the chair of this esteemed body. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I want to welcome the CSSD and our judicial branch colleagues and the CTECS, which Katie will remind me what it stands for. I apologize.
It's the Technical Education and Career System.
Thank you, and I apologize for not knowing the acronym, but we're glad to have you both who officially joined P20 WIN this year and were approved by the board at the April meeting. So welcome. There is an opportunity, as Katie said, this is a public meeting, so there is an opportunity for public comment. Is there any member of the public on who wishes to make a comment? Could you raise your hand? Virtual hand? Okay, I am not seeing any hands raised. So I will assume that there's no public comment today. Katie, could I ask you to please take the roll?
Sure. Isha Canada.
Present.
Eileen McMurr, designee for Best Buy.
Present.
Dante Bartolomeo. Scott Gall.
Present.
Deidre Gifford.
Present.
Ryan Kathuria.
Present.
Tim Larson.
Present.
Chris McClure.
Present.
Julie Ravaz for Gary Roberge.
Present, thank you.
Kelly Valeries.
Present.
Charlene Russell Tucker.
Present.
Jen Woodness. I think she just joined.
She just joined.
Thank you. Trina Mazzata for Mike Williams.
Present.
And Rika Wren.
Present.
Wonderful. We have a quorum.
Great. Thank you very much. So the next item on the agenda is approval of a new agency to join our collaborative, and that is the Department of Corrections. We have received recommendations to add DOC as a new participating agency. I believe the board members received a letter recommending both agencies. Just one agency, correct, Katie? Or is it two? My
apologies.
Okay, all right. I'm reading off my annotated agenda, and I just wanted to clarify. So you all received the letters of recommendation last week. Is there a representative from DOC who wants to make any comments about joining P20 WIN before we ask for a motion?
Hi, ma'am. This is Eulalia Garcia, District Administrator and Director of Programs with the Connecticut Department of Correction, and I am Commissioner Quiros' designee. I am very excited that we'll be joining this initiative. Katie and I had to have some quality time earlier this week, and we're able to really unpack what this all means for the state and for the agency. So we are eager and very happy to be a part of this great project that's been going on for a little bit of time now, and one of the last agencies to join, so it's much needed. We do have a research and data analysis unit here that's newly formed at the department, but really looking forward to streamline these efforts, and I know that this will be a great way to do so. So thank you for having us join, and we are very eager to get started.
Thank you. And I think the addition of DOC to the data and to the work will be really important. I think we all hope we all hope that as an endpoint DOC, we get down to a vanishingly small number, but I think it's a really important piece to the larger puzzle. So great to have you joining. There'll be time for further discussion if anybody has it, but could I have a motion to add the Department of Corrections as a participating agency? Moved by Executive Director Larson. Is that right, Tim?
Absolutely, Commissioner. I move to approve the Department of the DOC to the P21 Executive Board.
Thank
Department
you.
of Corrections.
Do I have a second? Eileen?
Yes, I second the motion.
Thank you. All right. Is there any further discussion? All
Can I
right.
ask one thing?
Yeah, Scott.
Sorry. This is maybe a little silly, but I find it sometimes does help. If DA Garcia, do you want to talk about the work that corrections does? Because sometimes agencies do things that other agencies are not always aware of, if you're providing services or something beyond the correctional system directly. Just maybe a few words on the scope of what DOC does. That helps.
Sure, no problem. So the Department of Correction is responsible for housing residents in the state who are arrested for either misdemeanor or felony convictions, pretrial and sentence statuses. We have 13 facilities currently around the state. We've recently closed 3 within the last few years, 2 in the Enfield area and 1 over in Uncasville. And we do a lot. I particularly oversee our community release unit that reviews every package for a resident who's being considered for early release from our custody. I oversee all of the transfers in and out of the state. So when a resident transfers from one facility to another or to another state, depending on circumstances that would warrant that, I would oversee that, as well as our Unified School District number 1, which provides educational and vocational services to the population. We also have been working very closely with the Juvenile Justice Policy and Oversight Committee at the Legislative Office Building when it comes to juvenile justice reform. And we also have been thinking outside of the box a lot with employment opportunities for our residents, specifically at York, Brooklyn, and Willard-Cybulski, where they're afforded an opportunity to go out on work furloughs and go out to pursue aerospace and boat works, and they work during the day and then they come back to the facility to sleep at night, and they do that Monday through Friday. So that gives them some form of normalcy and productivity during their stay with us. So that's just a little bit of a snapshot of what we do, but there's so much more that I could talk about. I don't want to take anyone's time. So if you have particular questions with regards to what the agency does, we do have just the York Correctional that houses all of our women. So all of the other facilities are male populated facilities. Garner focuses on the mental health population. Manson Youth focuses on the 15 to 17-year-old adult charged residents, as well as up to the age of 22 per statute. And then we have our Cybulski Reentry Center, which really focuses on reintegration into society, and Brooklyn, which predominantly houses any residents who have sex offenses. So that's just a little bit of information on what we do. And I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you.
You're
Helpful.
welcome. You're welcome.
Scott, any additional questions from you? Okay.
No, that's it. Thanks.
Any questions or further discussion from board members? All right, hearing none. Katie, do you want to do a roll call vote? And the motion is to add the Department of Corrections as a new participating agency to P20 WIN.
Good afternoon. I will be taking the roll call vote for
Thanks,
Katie at this
Andre.
moment in time. So I will be starting with Departmental Leader Dante Ballermano.
Yay.
Okay. Eileen McMurray for Beth By.
Yay.
All right. Isha Canada, DSS.
Yay.
Okay. Amber Freeman for Sarah Fox.
Yay.
Scott Gall for OPM.
Yay.
Deidre Griffith, OHS.
Yes.
Rai Kathura, CSCU.
Yes.
Tim Larson, OHE.
Yes.
Chris McClure, Demas.
Yes.
Julie Revez for Gary Roberge for CSSD.
Yes.
Kelly Villeras, OWS.
Yes.
Charlene Russell Tucker, SDE.
Yes.
Jen Wildness, CCIC.
Yes.
Tarina Mirzada for Mike Williams for DCF.
Yes.
And finally, Rekha Ren for Yukon.
Yes.
Okay, the ayes have it. The motion passes.
Welcome, DOC. Just to clarify, I want to make sure CTECS and CSSD, were they part of the roll call or
Yes, ma'am.
we got them both? Sorry, Andre, did you call both?
Yes, I did, ma'am. Sorry about that.
Okay,
I was muted.
all right. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure. Great. All right. Next item on the agenda is a data request for discussion. We've had a request regarding disengaged and disconnected youth in Connecticut. We received a data request from BCG to look at disengaged and disconnected youth in Connecticut. It included 5 participating agencies. And we have a representative from BCG here to talk about the data request. I believe Ken Watari from BCG is on. If we could ask you to provide some background for the board members.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much for having us on. My name is Ken Watari. I'm a project leader and was the project manager on the ground for this. I'm here with 2 of my colleagues, Lane McBride and Vidya Sekaran. Would you all like to quickly introduce yourselves, and then I can project, and then we can share a brief briefing.
That sounds great. Hi, everybody. Lane McBride. I lead the Education and Workforce Development practice at BCG North America, and it's great to be with you this afternoon.
I think you're muted, Vidya.
Sorry about that. Vidya Sekaran. I was a consultant on the effort, and I'm very excited to be here.
So as you're pulling up the slides, Ken, I might just introduce what we're going to do today. We're really excited to be back with this group to provide an update on the research that P20 data has enabled over the past months. And so today, wanted to provide an update on the research questions that our team has been engaged on, a bit about the process that we followed, going through, working together with you all to request the data and then to conduct the analysis, and then talk a bit about the next steps that we have planned. Not to scoop the next steps too much, but there is a report release scheduled for October the 11th with the findings, and so we're not going to scoop the findings in this discussion. But we know that there is in the works a session with this group to have a discussion of the findings from the research later in October. So this will be just a brief update on the process, on the research questions, and then we'll have more time very shortly, within a few weeks, to talk about the findings from the research. Ken, do we have the slides?
I'm trying to get it up. Would you mind just continuing on voiceover?
Sure, we've already covered the first one, so I'll start working on the second one, and hopefully my verbal descriptions will do okay. So just a bit of background, our team at BCG was commissioned by Dalio Education and the Connecticut Opportunity Project to do this research. We've been engaged in the work for about a year. It started in August of last year. And we are focused on the populations of at-risk and disconnected young people in Connecticut, with primary research questions being, firstly, identifying which young people are at risk and disconnected, which involves, as you might imagine, first defining what at risk and disconnected mean, and then analyzing the data to show which young people are at risk and disconnected in Connecticut. And then crucially, combining both this quantitative data on those questions with stakeholder conversations, including the input of those who have been affected. And we've had over 100 stakeholder conversations to supplement the analysis of the data. And of course, I'm in the second paragraph here. The purpose of this is to shed light on how this data can inform better identification and support of these young people. This particular analysis advances on prior work in a couple of different ways. So one, we've expanded the aperture of the age range to look at the full age range from 14 to 26. And then two, along with that, we have, I believe for the first time, and at least this way in Connecticut, connected education, workforce, select social services data, and we've also separately looked at justice data. Of course, with the new partners in P20 Win, future analyses will be able to connect the justice data in an even more integrated way, which is really, really exciting. The way that the analysis is done, we will be able to tailor to the Connecticut context and show results at the level of each of the 169 municipalities in the state. So we are grateful to P20 for the opportunity to partner in this analysis. We do believe that with your data and partnership, we've been able to do some things here that will be insightful and we hope helpful. I'll now pass it over to Ken to go in a bit more detail.
Perfect. Thank you, Lane. So we'll spend go through a few pages to share both in terms of what data we've received, what were the questions that we were able to answer with the data, and then finally a little bit on what was the process that we took in partnership with P20 Win with all of you to get us to where we are today. And we'll share a little bit at the end about a few of the next steps that we've got going on. So first, on this page, we've laid out, we've got integrated data across 5 different state agencies. Thank you all for your support over essentially the past year. We'll go over, what are the types of data that we received from the Department of Education. First, essentially records of high school participation of anybody who was ages 14 to 26 from the period of 2014 to 2022. So significant longitudinal data spanning from things around attendance, behavior, and academic standing, which we used as a measure to try to identify folks who are at risk of non-graduation, and then measures of graduation. We also received data around adult education and around post-secondary participation from National Student Clearinghouse. And we then went on to integrate that with the Department of Labor, both in terms of what wages were earned and whether folks were employed or not, at least those we can identify with unemployment insurance, and records of workforce training participation, so various programs offered by the state. The last 3 that we received data from, DEMIS, and this was essentially records of services provided by DEMIS, recognizing that it's services provided versus an indicator of mental health needs across the state. We understand it's not comprehensive, as well as from Department of Children and Families. 3 different data sets around children and placement, so folks who are in foster care or not, allegations. So folks around abuse and neglect, etc. And then also on pieces around services provided. And finally, a piece on, we got data from the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness around services provided for folks experiencing homelessness. And as was briefly mentioned, we did receive data from the Department of Corrections and Judicial Branch as well. Not quite with the right timing so that we can get it integrated, but we were able to analyze it separately. And it will be a great next step to do further analysis with all of it integrated. So now, what were the questions that we were able to answer? Would like to share through at a high level. And as we were mentioning, we would love to share the findings with you once we're able to get it published. But the key main questions we were able to answer were, one, what was just the basic question of how many at-risk and disconnected young people were there in the state, and how has that shifted over time? That's actually quite a difficult question to answer, essentially because this population are those that are falling through the cracks across different systems. And so it was quite important and quite valuable for us to get this integrated data to be able to see how young people are interacting across multiple systems and how young people are interacting across time. The second question that we sought to answer was, longitudinally speaking, if you project out all the way out to age 22 or age 24, in the medium term, how are young people doing? The folks who, let's say, dropped out of high school and experienced disconnection earlier on, how are they doing as they've aged? Are they employed? Are they earning wages? Have they had experiences with various institutions? What is happening to them? We were able to see that. And third, we also looked at, there's significant literature on what are the types of factors that could be associated with increased risk of disconnection. And we were able to see through the data what those associations actually look like in practice in the state of Connecticut. So from a demographic perspective, we looked at race and ethnicity, looked at gender, sex. From in-school factors, we were able to look at things like special education participation, alternative education participation, transiency, so school transferring schools multiple times across the state. And out-of-school factors, we looked at things like the involvement with DCF, DMIS, and involvement with CCH. And finally, called out at the bottom here, beyond the three questions answered above, as we conducted this analysis, one thing that became incredibly clear is how rich this data is, and how much more potential there is. And so we're still in the process of conducting further deep dives, leveraging this data, and building even more of an evidence base for the report. And finally, let me share a little bit about what the process was that we took to get to this place. We've been on a long journey together. We've been working together since for the past year, essentially. But the process was in four main steps, and happy to share more in our later session. But essentially, first, we spent 2 months drafting the research proposal, engaging with the P20 WIN team and across the agencies, drafted the proposal. Second, and this was the most significant chunk of time, we drafted and secured approvals for both the detailed data elements that we included in the data request, as well as pulled together the data sharing agreement, teamed with all of you to get the necessary approvals, get it over the line. Third, there was significant work done by all of you and the DOL and the P20 WIN team to get all this data pulled and matched. And finally, we spent the past couple of months since June pulling it all together into a master database, understanding the data gaps and working with all of you to fix them, and analyzing the data and gleaning the insights. This has been a significant, extensive effort in terms of the number of agencies involved and the amount of data we received. And so we're able to learn a lot through the process, and we'd be excited to share with you around kind of what worked particularly well, what are some places of potential improvement, and we would love to have a session dedicated exclusively to that, to cover that with you. And let me just end with where we are now and what we're where this is going next. So the report will be launched via a press event on October 11th in a couple of weeks, organized by Dalio Education, the Connecticut Opportunity Project, and they will then in turn be engaging stakeholders across the state, sharing out the report findings and recommendations and drumming up support across the state to focus on this population. And of particular relevance to y'all. We're excited to continue this conversation and to go into a detailed session with y'all to cover the report findings and a reflection on the process. But I will close here and give my thanks for your support and welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Comments and questions and/or questions from the board? Amber.
Hi, I have a question around what are you classifying as far as a disconnected youth? So when it comes to school, is it a youth that is not attending at all? Is it one that has missed several days? What are you looking at as far as disconnected?
Yes, just give me 1 second. Actually, can y'all see this slide?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, we've got a framework here, but essentially,
Ken,
to
we
answer your
still see the, I'm sorry, Ken, we still see the slide that has the data request and analysis process. So maybe you can just hit the summary points.
Got it. Yeah. Essentially, we've defined it in 2 terms. So the first piece was around educational attainment. So did they finish high school or not? Around education, and they continuing education. And then second, the piece around employment. So are they working or not? So broadly speaking, we're looking at education and employment systems, and we then classified them into moderately disconnected and severely disconnected. So to show the continuum of need, for severely disconnected, we defined it as folks who were both were high school non-graduates, did not graduate from high school, and were not employed. And then for moderately disconnected, we have 2 different categories. So one are the folks who did graduate from high school, but then did not go on to continue with post-secondary education and were not employed. And the second are the folks who are high school non-graduates, so did not graduate from high school, but did either attain a GED or were employed. And so essentially, just to summarize, we looked at 2 different factors. One was around connection to institutions for connection, so that folks have a place to go and a place to learn and a place to grow. And 2, a pathway to economic self-sufficiency.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And maybe I could just ask people to reintroduce themselves and their organization when they're posing a question. So I think Ajit is next.
Hi, thank you. I know this report is with the Data Governing Board of the P20 Win Council for review around suppression and things like that. If we have questions about the specifics of the report, do you want us to discuss it separately? And maybe this is a question for Scott and Katie.
Yeah, Scott, you want to take that one?
Probably separately, because I think I've lost track if we've actually approved it or not, but we're pretty close to going through the review for that.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Bartolomeo.
Thank you very much. So I'm Dante Bartolomeo, Commissioner for Department of Labor. And I just had a comment that we really found the previous Dahlia report on this topic to be really helpful during a lot of the work that we've done at Department of Labor since around 2016. I don't remember if it was 2016 or 2014 that report came out, that last one, but that number of like 41,000 disconnected youth is something that we've used quite a lot. So we're super excited to see the new version, the updated report that you're doing, and actually even have an appointment with Dalio to kind of get a preview. So thank you for taking this on again. I think it's really helpful in guiding a lot of the work that we do.
That's great to hear. We're excited to be a part of it.
Thanks, Commissioner. I don't see any other hands raised, so I actually have a question/comment. Oh, Eileen, OEC.
Yes, so I'm here representing Beth Bai, but in my perfect world, we would take your data matching and bring it down to preschool, pre-K, and look at some of the discipline, suspension, expulsion data, and then track those children further along to see if they become have a greater propensity for being disengaged. Just want to put that placeholder there.
I completely agree. I would sign up for that too.
Thank you, Eileen. My comment was along similar lines, which is additional thoughts and ideas. First of all, I want to say that I think this is such a wonderful example of the potential of P20 WIN. And I'm sorry that it still took 8 months to get all the data agreements in place. But I think had this collaboration not existed, we may not have even ever succeeded. So glass half empty is that it was maybe faster than it would have been under different circumstances. But I think one of our goals could potentially be to look at that process and see if there's any ways that we might continue to streamline it for researchers and others who are less patient maybe than Dalio. My comment was, and I know that Isha is here from DSS, but there is some evidence that both Medicaid and SNAP have mitigating impacts on some of these adverse outcomes for kids. And I was wondering, and we know that Medicaid is the largest payer for children's behavioral health services. So I was wondering about the pros and cons of including or not the Medicaid and SNAP data. And was that something you considered and it was just too high of a data sharing hurdle, or what was the thinking there?
Thank you for the question being posed, Commissioner. This is actually my second board meeting, so I don't think I was privy to the data analysis and the work being done before, but happy to take it back to understand what concerns, if any, we would include the Medicaid and SNAP data. To your point, I agree that there would be a lot of beneficial data points in there where we might be able to gain some insights, but thank you for being flexible that I can't outright answer the question in today's call, being a new person, but thank you.
Isha, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was actually wondering about BCG's thoughts on it, but I appreciate hearing from you as well.
We agree with the concept, and when we started with a very broad aperture of the data that would be helpful here, and we worked through it. I don't even, and we've had even some evolution of our team in a year's time. I don't have the exact rationale for how individual agencies from the original list were dropped, but we'd be happy to debrief on that and talk through it. I think in concept, to very much agree with your point.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, I know Dalio is obviously interested in preventing disconnection and disengagement as well as interventions, and just wondering if our Medicaid and SNAP programs are having any impact. And we would have seen even more disconnected youth had they not had those programs available to them. Thank you for considering it. Anybody else? Great. Well, thank you for the update. I think we all will really look forward to October the 11th and hearing what your results are, and then further engagement with you on the details of the program.
Thank you all.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn now to Scott for 2 updates. And Scott, I'm just going to mush item 6 and item 7 from the agenda together since they're both you. The first is to get an update on our efforts to incorporate equity data into the data request process, and then to talk about our learning agenda for 2024 and have a little bit of discussion. So I'll turn it over to you, Scott.
Sure, thanks. And I'll cover these kind of as quickly as I can to get through it. But what we are hoping really for the learning agenda is also to have a similar discussion with executive board members on the topics that are questions that are important to you, so that we can dig into those to the extent possible using the P20 win data. I would say the example from the report that we just discussed is a really good example of, I think, as Dr. Gifford had said, the potential to use P20 win data. The one thing that you might consider is, in this case, these are not necessarily your questions. These are questions that are in this coming from an outside third party, but you might want to say, okay, here's what I would want to know. The example of, the whether some of the benefits programs help with youth disengagement. So there's really an opportunity to make sure that we are using the data to answer your questions, and that's where what we'll go through for the learning agenda in a minute. First, I'm going to give a brief update on the equity efforts. This is something we had discussed in previous board meetings and wanted to have on the agenda as a standing item, so that we make sure that it is top of mind for everyone involved. P20 win effort. I think sort of the flip side, and I think there's a reason there's hesitation from some of the agencies to participate. The flip side of the data request also we just talked about is it's a lot of information on a lot of people. And so we want to make sure folks are thinking about, what are we doing when we pull this data together across different agencies? What are the benefits, but what are also the risks for individuals? And so we're trying to put in place some steps in the process to make sure that everybody's thinking about that actively. We'll pull out 3 things we've kind of done in the last year. This is really work that a lot of it goes through the data governing board, and so your representatives on that board have been the leaders on this front. We produced for the first time an annual report last year that goes through some of the work for P20 when it has a special emphasis on the focus on trying to incorporate equity into the process. So that's a new thing where we can try and report out to people, be a little more transparent about the work that's being done, and specifically cover equity in that. We're going to pilot an assessment process that I will give a ton of credit to the Department of Social Services and Susan Smith, your rep, for developing this. We're going to pilot a process to ask essentially questions about the potential impact of a data request in the review of the request. So in that long part in the middle that Ken went through in the slides, where people are reviewing their request, figuring out what's going to happen with this, what does it mean, that we're asking questions about equity the same way we would ask questions about the validity of the data elements or about the security for the data requester and so on, so that we're keeping them at the same level and asking questions about the potential impact of the data request as those are reviewed. So we've got a framework that DSS was the primary author of, and we're going to pilot it in this context the next 2 months. And then soon, hopefully by the end of the year, possibly sometime in the next calendar year, we're going to pull together a resident advisory board to provide some external perspective. 2, data integration efforts help us to build trust with community when we're using their data. I know many of the agencies here have something like that on your own, where there's some sort of community engagement or advisory function, even for the analysis, again, that BCG was talking through. There was a youth panel or something along those lines. I hope I'm getting that right. That was part of that process. And so we want to make sure we've got something like that for P20 win. And so soon we're planning to put something like that in place. And we've got some planning underway and some grant support for that. Those are the equity efforts, those 3 things. I'm going to talk through kind of trying to pull it into annual report, developing the assessment process so that it's part of the standard process of reviewing requests, and then building a direct community engagement function into this as well. Questions or comments or feedback on that, again, that really helps, particularly the folks on the data governing board have been wonderful thinking through ways to do this. But if there's something that your agency is doing or that we should be doing, please raise it up now or later, and we'll make sure that we're seeing what we can do to incorporate that into the process. Right.
The only thing I will just offer is that we know that our rail data tends to be incomplete. And depending on the agency, it's probably better in some than in others. And I guess the only thing I would add for consideration to the 3 interventions that you talked about is some sort of feedback loop, Scott, to the submitted, the participating agencies. And maybe that's already anticipated in what you're talking about, but I do think it's helpful for agencies to know we couldn't do this analysis because you only had 30% of that field filled in or whatever, as you're thinking through the assessment piece of it.
Yeah, that is another thing we do not have as part of the process, but I think that feedback loop, looking at data quality, that's a critical question. And there are lots of reasons people don't trust giving state agencies data on things if they don't have to. So I'm going to understand that and try and build trust, but also understand the limitations in the data. I'm going to screen share and very quickly go through slides on the learning agenda, unless directed otherwise. We wanted you to have a sense of 2 things kind of quickly before we jump into discussion. And I will think of the right slides. Tell me about if I did this right. 1, what a learning agenda is, a refresher, why we were talking about this, and then some of the things that have been done already. And again, I think if you think about the Boston Consulting request on disengaged use, it's a really good example of the potential. We should make sure it's lining up with what are your burning questions. So this is a little description of a learning agenda. We have one already, but we want to keep it up to date on a regular basis. It's a way for, again, really identifying your agency's priority questions, trying to come up with a consolidated agenda that we can use for P20 Win to direct data requesters, to direct our own activities through it. We're mimicking a federal process. All federal agencies are required to come up with learning agendas. The name is just very similar to a research agenda. And so I think a lot of agencies have research agendas, but it's really intended, and we bring it up in this setting to make sure that the executive leadership from the agencies really thinks about your priority issues, your burning questions, things that you want answered with the data that either your agency collects or some other member of this collaborative is collecting, and then we could use the data to try and get at the answers to those questions. So we've got one version, but we want to keep this up to date as agencies change, as policy questions change, as the world around us changes. So that's the goals for a learning agenda. Current topics we have are 5 here that were put in place when there's a smaller group of agencies around the table, and so we again we added 1 today and 2 in the last board meeting. So we've got new agencies, new perspectives, new issues, but this is kind of the list that we're starting with, and we want to take a few minutes to try and make sure that we're covering the topics that you care about. And we've made progress on this, so we've got some work underway that is a credit to several of the agencies here for digging into the requests we just discussed about at-risk and disconnected youth. There's really nice analysis coming out about post-secondary outcomes soon, hopefully by the time of the next meeting through State Department of Ed. Looked at manufacturing programs, the interaction between the homelessness system and workforce training programs, students with IEPs, what happens to them in post-secondary settings, and then really the whole pipeline for college and career readiness, what we're seeing for students in the K-12 setting when they go into post-secondary settings and then out into the workforce. So we've been able to make progress on several of these, but we want to make sure that we're focusing on the questions that are your priorities. So I will stop screen sharing, and we have myself, we've also got Coral and Ashley from OPM here to help kind of dig into the questions. Katie has put a lot of time and effort into getting ready for this meeting and made it through the beginning of the meeting, but I don't think is going to make it through the end of it. She's a little under the weather, and please send your best wishes to her if you can outside this sitting, but we will get over the finish line today. So I think what we wanted to do is take a few minutes for discussion on topics for the learning agenda and make sure that things that you care about are on the agenda.
Scott, I'll let you moderate the discussion part if that's okay.
That's okay. All right. And I forget if I should address you as superintendent or Dr. Solik or executive director, but Ellen.
Or all of the above.
All the
Thank you,
above.
Scott.
Everyone.
First of all, I just want to reiterate our appreciation collectively as an agency for being able to have representation on this very valuable group, and so excited to see 2 of the learning agenda items, if not more, but certainly around the workforce readiness piece and also the college and career piece, because CTEX, which I recognize we throw that acronym out there all the time and people say, what's a CTEX? So we are known as the Connecticut Technical Education and Career System, which is a long-winded way of saying that we are an integral part of the state's workforce development system, both for grades 9 through 12 and also the adult learning sector. And so all of the data we just heard from the study in progress around disenfranchised and disengaged students ties in very closely to some of the work we're doing around trying to determine of those students who are disengaged or somewhat so. And we certainly don't have the quantitative data to back up those definitions yet, but what is it about workforce development that we can do better to re-engage a population that back in preschool somehow got lost in the shuffle? And so that work very much interests us. But I wanted to also speak to the value of P20 WIN, and many of us who are on the board are also seated on the governor's workforce development task force and doing a lot of work around discovering the data that we can all share in taking a harder look at doing a better job of workforce development across the state of Connecticut. So I'll just end by saying any ways that we at CTEX, that lovely acronym, can contribute to workforce development data gathering efforts within P20 WIN or in other ways as well, please don't hesitate to reach out. And again, it's certainly an honor to be invited to and incorporated as a part of the group. So thanks so much.
Thank you. And my apologies again for the acronym, not knowing your acronym by heart.
No worries. That's okay, dude. It took me a bit too. So no problem. Thank you.
Other comments on the learning agenda? Scott, can you help the board understand how the work of the learning agenda gets done? Is that essentially how we use the P20 WIN funding, or how do we prioritize the issues on the learning agenda? Can you just remind us the relationship between output and this learning agenda?
Yeah, it serves sort of 2 purposes. One's kind of internal facing and one's external facing. So the external facing one's a little bit easier to cover, but it's a way of being upfront about the priorities for the agencies involved. And so when external requests come in, could be from a group like BCG or research or somewhere, we can say these are the questions that we care about, the way in which we care about it. So it helps them refactor the request, or we can prioritize and say, like, this is great, this is very interesting, but this is not our priority because there's a list of priorities that we have here that are stated what we care about. That's kind of the external facing, helps filtering. Internal facing is it helps direct the activities for the the group and the staff that are working on this and the agencies. And I think that's probably the area where there's more potential for benefits to say that, okay, there's something where it's like, this is a priority. It's a way that we can then facilitate, that. I see Commissioner Russell Tucker has her hand up, so she could say, oh, this is a question for SDE, but we need access to data on homelessness or the juvenile justice system. And then it says, okay, this is where we should be directing. Let's make sure the elements, the staff involved in a data dictionary, the request, and so that we are prioritizing and working on those things that are the agency's priority system should benefit you. But it's a way to direct it so that we've got a sense of the priorities for things that we undertake. And hopefully then we can report out on accomplishments, every year and be like, here's the things that were done for this topic that's on the learning agenda. Stop talking.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Scott. And actually, one of the things I was thinking about, looking at the agenda, I don't know the timeline that things have been on the agenda and whether the need to adjust any of that is necessary. I was just questioning, for example, the student with disabilities piece that's on there. And I probably just need to get some more background on it, but just trying to get a sense of how we have input into that and how long things stay there on the agenda, and do we have the ability for adjustments. What I truly appreciate, and I didn't weigh in, there's so much I could say about the disconnected, that report, and look forward to it. One of the key benefits is that it's not just the education data that is there. There's a lot, as you know, we have a lot of information in that space. However, the conversations that we must have is how all these systems support our young people. And we know schools don't do that by themselves alone. Looking at mobility, and that is so critical for us to be having that conversation. So I look forward to that and look forward to more being able to do that across our agencies, because I do believe that is how we're going to make a difference, is when all our systems are aligned and we're all working very purposely in that direction. So I thank you. I could have said that earlier, but I just wanted to add that. But specifically, Scott, just asking about the agenda and kind of the timeline with things on it and the ability to adjust.
So the agenda we have now has been stable for the last few years, but we're hoping to have it up to date on I think an annual basis is what we think seems reasonable. It lines up with the legislative cycle, the budget development cycle. You could say, okay, here's things, this is a new priority for us. We really need to think about this issue. So we're hoping we can keep it up to date every year. It probably shouldn't, change a lot every year. But the one we have has been in place for a little while. So we're again looking for feedback in this or outside to say, here's a topic that our agency cares about. We want to make sure it's on there, and then hopefully we'll be able to keep this cycle kind of going on an annual basis.
Thank you.
I think maybe what we can do, Scott, given this really helpful discussion, is have board members maybe take away to do. We can follow up in writing with board members and then revisit this at the next meeting of the board. So people have a chance to think about it a little bit, maybe consult with their other agency leadership. And then we can follow up maybe in 2 or 3 weeks with just a written query reminder to board members to send ideas. And then we'll put this back on the agenda for our next board meeting to hear what the results were. Does that work for people? Yeah. Okay. I want to just echo Eileen's, thought about the early childhood stuff that we saw school readiness, I think, on the agenda, but the interest in school readiness to me is kind of an outcome as much as it is a predictor of other things. And I think we should contemplate maybe looking at even earlier childhood indicators and how those are predictive of later educational attainment or disconnectedness, et cetera, and whether any of the early childhood interventions that the state has been making, whether it's universal home visiting, our investments in infant and young child mental health, all of those things, whether those are having an impact. So I'll toss that out as something maybe we can add to the agenda.
Thank you. Yes, I had invited Beth to contribute. So when I suggested that, it was with my hat on, but Beth's favorite mantra that we all hear regularly, which is a very important question, is how are the children doing?
Yeah.
So some of our programs touch moms prenatally, and we continue on the best we can. We want to know and have a better understanding of the differences that those programs are making.
Great. So thank you. We'll revisit this at the next meeting. I think I have 3:57 on my clock. We're gonna delay the item number 8 on our agenda on the grant update for the next meeting. Is there any other business that board members want to bring before us before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Okay, great. Seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Kelly Marie.
Kelly.
Anybody get second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Russell Tucker. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed to adjournment? All right, thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.